Hi, MED 725. I'm going to talk about philosophy today. And if you don't know this book or this author, and I'm sorry, but the video is backwards, but Oliver Sacks works at Columbia University, is an incredibly bright man. Obviously, he's a full professor at Columbia and is incredibly interested in music, psychology, psychiatry, how the brain works, cognitive functions. And there's some things on YouTube by him that are pretty amazing. He's written a lot of books that come from different perspectives of just life and how life works, but has a particular interest in music, which is great for us. And so one of his books, Musicophilia, The Love of Music, was what that term means, or certainly how he defines what that term means. Just some other titles of his: The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which actually was made into a major motion picture. Awakenings, An Anthropologist on Mars, the Island of the Colorblind, and Uncle Tungsten. And these seem like odd titles, but he's an incredibly well-read, well-educated person, and his writing is very, very easy to read. So I highly recommend this book among the others that he's written. Maybe this one specifically because it's about music and the love of music. As you thumb through the book, there's lots and lots of anecdotes, lots and lots of stories, and I feel like you kind of have to read the whole book for it all to really gel together, and you go, wow, I don't often think of music as much as I think I do, and when I do think about it, I really think about it in context of my music, my musicking, what my music world is like, and not what everyone else's is like. Keeping in mind that we are, as music educators, the minority. Less than 1% of the population have their PhD in music, and less than 1% of those people have a PhD in music ed. Um, and that, if that's the kind of the end of how we can have a music ed title is with a PhD, that number increases for those with masters, and that number increases for those with undergraduate degrees, but not near as many as we would think. You take all education teachers in this country, charter schools, private schools, public schools, universities, community colleges, so on and so forth, we still represent like 3.7% of all educators, which is not a lot, and we tend to exist in our world and forget that the vast majority of the rest of the world find music just as fascinating and as important as we do, but aren't as educated about the details about it. But maybe, excuse me, in some ways, um, have a fresh perspective, a perspective that we need to know about that will allow us to better serve the world as music educators. So I wanted to mention that. There are some videos of him talking on YouTube. There are some experiments that he's a part of with music, and I think I'm actually going to post one of those on the Blackboard in the next couple of days. Philosophy, the last video, as I mentioned, may have shook some people pretty hardcore to their foundation of what they believe and why they do what they do. I think that's important as graduate students. I think the most important thing about being a graduate student is being curious. And sometimes that curiosity is just simply, wow, why does that person believe what they believe and I believe something very, very different? I think as soon as we shut people and things down and say that someone else's opinion can't be right because it's different than mine, we lose out on perspective. And I think that that's incredibly important, not only for us to understand ourselves, but for us to understand others. With that having been said, in the world of philosophy, there are a lot of different types of beliefs and a lot of different types of philosophers and a lot of different ways of looking at things, and we come up with labels. If someone said to me, Mark, I need to know, how do you see yourself as a investigator of teaching techniques or music ed research? What label would you place on yourself? And I would say, well, I'm a behavioralist. I am interested in investigating why we exhibit the behaviors we exhibit as music teachers and how those behaviors do or do not move us toward high levels of student success. With all that said, we have to define success. We might even have to define the word student. How we define success is very different for all of us as we get toward the end of marching band season, and so many groups have been competing. A lot of groups will say they were incredibly successful because of where they placed at a contest. They may say that they were successful because they placed higher than they did last year, or they made a bigger score than they did last year. And I think we have to be careful at defining success in those ways, and certainly within those ways exclusively. However, they can be in part a measure of success. Keeping in mind, I think that the best determiner of improvement of students or a program is the person with the most expertise. And while a judge may have some expertise as to how they felt my group did at that moment for those 6.5, 7, 8 minutes, that person can never be an expert as to who my students are, what they need, what the community needs, what the community supports, what the community wants me to foster within the students. So all that to have said, I'm interested in those behaviors and why we do the things that we do. Referentialist, someone who refers and looks at everything in relationship to everything else. If someone were asking you to define music or define the importance of music, you might would turn to other things. Well, it's like this. It's like dance. It's like emotion. Music emotions are like going to a movie where something is happening in your brain that pulls on memories, pulls on your own experiences, and therefore music kind of attaches itself to that and creates feelings and emotions. So there are all these labels, and the most important thing that I think I would like for you to understand is that there are all these labels out there, one, for different ways that we think and believe things and look at things. We can't put everybody under one category. I'm not strictly a behavioralist and nothing else. There's a lot of other things that I believe in that I'm interested in. But the most important thing I think is that we all know that these terms exist, and they kind of help us get on the same page. If someone's going to read research of mine, and they know my background is one of behaviors and behavioral research, where I'm primarily looking at human error, human success, and everything in between, and trying to define and explain all those things, it allows them, when they read my research, to kind of put my work, my words into context. Who is this guy? What does he basically believe? What lens does he look through for his own studies, his own contemplations, his own philosophy, so that when I read his stuff, I kind of know who he is basically as a scholar. So that having been said, labels and putting labels on people. As musicians, we often make analogies to athletics and athletic departments. They need money, we need money. A lot of people see them as extracurricular. They see music often as extracurricular, although it's not. That term should not be used. Although I'm not so sure, as music educators, we've done a very good job of educating our peers and our admin that music in most states and in most places is no longer extracurricular. It is part of the curriculum. But we still label ourselves. I'm an art teacher, I'm a band director, I'm a choir director, I'm an orchestra director, I teach general music, I teach jazz band, I teach guitar. And we encourage our students here at USM, certainly our undergrads, and even more so our grads, to see themselves as musicians and to not even label themselves that way. Partly to avoid the stereotypes, partly to create a sense of solidarity, so that if my building has, or my district has 5 choir teachers and 5 band directors and 5 orchestra teachers and 3 additional people that teach music in various forms, that we're all seen as musicians and that we're all pulling in the same direction. And I think we often categorize ourselves too much as being a band person, orchestra person, a choir person, and again, we greatly discourage our students here from doing that. When they do that, we're like, whoa, wait, nope, you're a musician. First and foremost, you're a music educator. Maybe you have some areas of specialty. So that idea of labeling ourselves, sometimes working for our disadvantage, but could work for our advantage if we continue to look at that. We all stereotype coaches and who they are and how they speak and how they act. And as they say, stereotypes exist for a reason. If you pulled every administrator in the world together and you gave them all an honesty pill and they had to say exactly what they thought about art teachers and maybe specifically about choir teachers or band teachers or guitar teachers, we may not like what they would say. that honesty appeal, making them say exactly what they think. And then we would have to, I think, need to take a step back and go, is there a stereotype for a reason? Do we exhibit some of these behaviors? Are there labels? Are there labels we put on ourselves that then attach emotions or thoughts or feelings or certain things to them that we need to avoid? So in this idea of creating a philosophy, um, ask yourself this. If every music educator in this country, around the world, had the same basic philosophy and the same basic belief, would it not strengthen our cause? When you went to your principal, if it was the same thing that that principal's friend, who's also a principal at a different school, was hearing from their music teacher, and had heard that last week and last month and last year and 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago, that every time somebody was on the Today Show, every time someone wrote a book, and every time someone was on YouTube talking about the importance of music education, we all kind of spoke with a very, very similar voice. Would that strengthen, would that make for a better cause to keep music in our schools, to keep music important, for us to continue to explore and look at ways to teach music better? I firmly believe that it would. There are so many examples of that in so many other fields, so many other historical events that we can look at that are very, very similar. When all the people pull the same direction, um, tug of war becomes a game that falls into your favor for sure. So this idea of labels, this idea of stereotyping people based on labels, labels exist for a reason. They are flexible. Sometimes we need to explain in more detail. But certainly having a philosophy and thinking about other philosophers and psychologists and sociologists that plop themselves into these categories of thinkers or ways of thinking is important. And I think it's important that we contemplate how we can better, as music educators, plop ourselves into one category, and that is music teachers. I like the term musician teachers. We're teaching people to be musicians. Not just to play the music, because they're just playing the dots on the page and we don't allow them to be creative. I'm not so sure that it's art education or aesthetic education anymore. If they're having feelings only twice a year because of playing at a concert when everything finally came together, I think we're missing lots and lots of opportunities. That's my opinion, based on years and years of experience, and the reason why all this hair is gone, and this hair is now all white. Spending a lot of time thinking about what I do, why I've done what I've done, when I continue to believe what I believe. I think it's important in developing a philosophy and continue to look at philosophy, that we look at modern problems that we have, curriculum problems, contemporary issues in music ed, the second book that you're looking at for class, and it talks about us not all being on the same page. It talks about some of the things that have happened that I mentioned on the last history video with the Yale seminar and the Tanglewood seminar, and these things that we have and haven't necessarily followed in the profession. With that, I thought for an exercise it'd be really great to ask you this question. What if you had to play both sides of an issue? You had to stand in front of the National Board for Education and explain why music is not an academic subject. That was your belief, that was your goal, that's what you were charged with doing. What would you say? And I think sometimes if we force ourselves to take the side that we aren't on, it makes us it puts ourselves into that side's shoes a little bit. Why is music not academic? Why is choir not academic? Why is orchestra not academic? Why is music theory not academic? Guitar class not academic? And what if I had to support that? What would I say? Even though it'd be very tough for me and tough for you probably, what would we say? Why it's not academic? The fear is, people would say it's frivolous. Music is frivolous. Music is entertainment. Music just basically gives kids something to do. It allows us to have live music at sporting events. So whatever list you would come up with, why it's not academic, all those that you think other people would say, then I think the important part of that exercise is to step back and go, in the music ed field, do we give people reasons to believe that? And I'm afraid that at times, all those things that you would say if you were trying to prove or help convince people that music was not an academic subject, that at times we very much fall into those traps. Our philosophy doesn't take hold enough, and we operate too much on necessity meaning I have to do this concert, and this concert, and everything in between those concerts is concert prep. But I'm not really doing a lot of teaching my students to think academically about music, to express themselves creatively about music, to create their own music, and to do a lot of exploration of what's going to make them someone who's curious, musically curious, and therefore intellectually musical or music centric. The other side of that, of course, is you get hired, you're told you have to go before the National Board of Education and explain why music is academic. We'd say a lot of the same things that are said all the time. Music is math. We can come up with fractions. We can do all that kind of stuff. We can talk about 6/8 time and 3/4 time, and even mixed meter and how music and math is related. We can talk about how playing a piece from Bosnia allows my students to be a little bit more culturally aware, especially if there's some scalar mode that it's written in that's very unique to that country, and so on and so forth. We can have our students write about the history of Haydn or the history of the concerto, and therefore there's some history in there, and we can do that. But there are also a lot of other subjects that can do that. How can we talk about music, strictly music and music making and music reading, as academia? And I think that begs the question, what is academia? What is academic? What determines whether or not something is an academic subject? So I'd encourage you to go online and just Google what is academia? What are academic subjects? What defines something as being academic? And use that to kind of encourage your own thoughts. Having talked about coaches earlier and sports earlier, we also often fall into this trap of comparing, especially as band people, and I get it because we're playing at all these sporting events all the time, comparing ourselves to sports. In order to elevate ourselves, we try to put sports down. Sports don't do this, and they don't do this, and they don't do that, and we spend money on that. So why shouldn't we spend money on this? And I think it in the long run hurts our cause. By putting somebody or something else down or showing it to not be as important, I'm not so sure that it always elevates us. There are some things we're going to fight the rest of our lives that we can't control, and that's the prevalence of sports in our society. It's not going away, ever. It's probably going to get stronger as time passes, so I think it's time for us as music educators to let that comparison go. There are other people that will make that comparison. I think we'll be ready to answer or respond when it presents itself. But I think in writing our own philosophies of music and music education and supporting what we do, we need to avoid that analogy. So overall, this talk very much about labels of philosophers or philosophies of teaching, and how you would label the way that you tend to look at things. As well as whether or not music is an academic subject or not. How do we justify whether it is or is not academic? These labels and these stereotypes happen for a reason, and contemplating why and what are those stereotypes about music educators may help us have a better perspective on what we do, which hopefully in turn would help us do what we do better, which means differently, and that we're always assessing whether or not we are living up to this philosophy, believing what we believe, and then making it happen. And I also think the last thing I'll say, the most important thing is that you allow yourselves to be challenged to change or modify your philosophy. Again, I said this on the last philosophy video. If you believe that music exists first and foremost to give kids a safe place to stay or safe place to be, and keeping your program alive and funding it is going to be based on that argument and that argument alone, we're in trouble. If you're going to base music being in the schools, music education being in the schools, because it creates teamwork, and you have to put all of your money, so to speak, on that argument, I'm not so sure that we're going to win, because a lot of other organizations can do the same for a lot less money than we can. So, as always, as graduate students, we should be very curious. Things should encourage us to think through things, to rethink our own beliefs, to look at other people's beliefs, and hopefully come up with something that's in the end stronger because of the time we've invested in thinking and pondering. As you continue to read in the book, the Second Mark book, a lot of great things in there. Reminder that you will have a wondering journal that you'll need to turn in. And I would keep it handy, constantly writing in it. I wonder why my students do this. I wonder if we were told 50 years from now there would be no choir, band, orchestra, if I could figure out how to make a curriculum really strong and get lots of students involved. I wonder if we were told as a district that if we didn't get our participation in the arts from 23% to 33% in 5 years, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I could be creative enough. I wonder if I could let go enough uh, and get out of my comfort zone a little bit and learn to play the guitar so I could therefore teach the guitar. Or teaching guitar, do I need to stay ahead of my students by a week or two? I have all this other musical knowledge that I've been working on for 30 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever it is. Could I justify adding things to the curriculum to get more students interested that wouldn't normally be in band, choir, orchestra? What can I do for my elementary students that not only would get them all to be involved, but all of them involved in some kind of after-school activity with music, or at least a larger percentage of the students that I have now? We can always do what we do better. It requires thought, requires change. Change is difficult. Hope you're doing well. Take care.